Our next presenter will be Wade Katz. The title of his presentation is A Gift to the Nation, the Perkins-Dennis Farm, an African-American farm in Pennsylvania's northern tier. Wade is a registered professional archaeologist and the president and principal of South River Heritage Consulting. He's a board member of the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust. He has been involved with activities at the Dennis Farm for more than a dozen years. Wade, you can get started.
Thank you, Kurt. I appreciate it. And thanks very much for inviting me to speak today about the Dennis Farm project. While I am entitling this the Perkins-Dennis Farm as part of the kind of looking at the archaeological work that's been done here, it is actually formally known as the Dennis Farm. And that's the term that you'll see me reference it a lot as I go through this. Like Angela, I'd like to note that there's a lot of people that have been involved in this work. I probably will mention some as I go along here. And also that the farm over the period of time that we've been working here, and it was created as a charitable land trust in 2001. We've received grants from the Endless Mountains Heritage Area, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the PHMC, and other local support, the Brooklyn Historical Society in Susquehanna County, and Cabot Oil and Gas, or what is now known as Terra, has been very much a sponsor and supporter of the work that we do. See, you should be moving. Yes. The title of this presentation comes from a statement that our later keynote speaker actually presented, and that was Cheryl LaRoche, who has been up to the farm at least one time. The Dennis Farm is a gift to the nation. The sweep of American history is written on the land. This is a remarkable site that has been in the same ownership of a family for a very, very long time. And the Dennis family, or the descendants of the Dennis family, are still the owners and holders of the charitable land trust. And the family also has a remarkable historical documentation of the history of the property. So it includes photographs and other memorabilia and books, papers, as well as the archaeological component in the land itself. As I mentioned, the ownership of the land, the people who hold the stewardship on the property, are the Dennis family and its descendants. And you see here pictured the three members of the family who are principal actors right now. Denise Dennis, to the right in that slide, is the chairman and CEO of the Charitable Land Trust. Daryl Gore behind her, and their cousin Lonnie Moore are shown here. But this is a property that has been owned by the same family and its descendants for nearly 200 years. We are on the National Register, partly as of some of the work that was done through the archaeology, which I'll describe. And in 2015, a historic marker was placed at the site. We have an annual symposium that we hold that is usually in the fall, which is a gorgeous time of year to be up at the property. And so these are the kinds of events and things that we will do that help us develop that broader community support and understanding of what this resource is and where it is. As I mentioned, the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust was created in 2001 by the two women that you see in the upper right-hand slide. That's Hope Dennis and her relative Denise Dennis, her niece. Hope was the person who envisioned something important happening here, and Denise is the person who's seeing that it comes to fruition. It was created to preserve and interpret the story of African-American self-determination on this property. It's a 153-acre parcel in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania. The mission of the trust is to develop that 153 acres into a heritage, education, and cultural site for scholars, researchers, educators, and the public who are interested in the farm and the region's extraordinary history. And the first priority for that is the renovation and restoration of the farmhouse, the Dennis farmhouse, which you see in the image there. and repurpose it as a museum. Additional projects that are proposed and will happen are an interpretive center that will house public events, rotating exhibits, and a research library. This is an area of Pennsylvania that isn't well known for an African-American background or African-American history, but but this site will help us understand that story. As I mentioned, it's located in the Endless Mountains Heritage Region in Susquehanna County. You see the region identified there with the other counties that make that up, Wyoming and Sullivan that you see there. It's above Scranton, so you're almost up to New York. On your way up to New York, it's off of I-81. Any of you who are heading up that way, we do site tours. And what led us to this site was work that was done back nearly 20 years ago now, when the Endless Mountains Heritage Region developed a management action plan, and the Dennis Farm was identified at that time as one of the significant resources in the area. The farm itself is located off of old U.S. route, or off of U.S. Route 11, which was an old railroad bed, and near the Oakley Crossing location. In the lower left corner, you see an image of that Oakley Crossing building and the station. Historically, this was a site area that was very close to the Owego Turnpike, and that image that you see in the upper left is actually a piece of the Owego Turnpike as it exists and looks today. So the Dennis Farm, as a historic site, was very, very close to a principal sort of an east-west road that would lead you eventually up into New York, and a north-south road moving from, you see on the bottom of that map, the village of Hop Bottom, and at the top, Kingsley. That road also led to the village of Montrose, and going to the north, and then going to the south, it went to the village of Waverly, both of which were very important and very significant abolitionist society locations, anti-slavery society locations. The farm itself is a remarkable space, and this is where my sense as a historical archaeologist is the broad range of resources that you can bring to bear on a study. And so it's not just the archaeology or just the documentation. It's a blend of all those things. And so it's a blend of the broader story of American history, but also family history, architecture, archaeology, and landscape. And if you look at the farm as sort of the center point of that, and all the directions that you can go with and study this particular space and time, the farmland itself gives you that entree in to be able to do these things. And we have all of these sort of bubbles that you see there as potential lines of investigation and ways to understand and interpret the site. The landscape, the archaeology, the architecture of the resources, the family history, which is deep and extensive, official records, which are often the things that you will come across, and then the broader Pennsylvania national history. The family collections I'll touch on briefly here, but they're pretty amazing. They include a really broad range of photography, beginning as early as possible in the 1930s. The family pictures are in the 30s into the 40s and well into the present. They show the changes of the house at various times and the family members on the property and a lot of the kind of daily life of things that were happening at the property. Also included in the family records are books that the family owned, including a couple of these that you see here. In the upper right is a copy of the family Bible, or an image from the family Bible, but a number of other volumes, including a first edition of William Still's The Underground Railroad. I'll come back to that a little bit later. And also, I find a really remarkable volume called The Memoirs of the Nullifier, 1829, in which Henry W. Dennis has margin notations that he writes to himself and to his family about the importance of this book. And if you sort of step back from this and think about you're talking, the Nullifier volume talks about the nullification crisis in South Carolina, and yet we have a household on essentially a mountainside in northeastern Pennsylvania where the owner of that property is thinking and reading about the importance of and the concerns that he has for what the nullification crisis could mean for American history. Other connections that the family has take us into deep roots into the region, and that is the connection to the Gershom Prince powder horn pictured here. Gershom Prince was an American Revolutionary War soldier. He was killed at the Battle of Wyoming. His powder horn was recovered from that battlefield and is now on loan to the Museum of the American Revolution. Gershom was a relative of Prince Perkins, who was the original family settler on the property. The horn itself is still available to see, and anybody who wants to go and see it right now could go to the Museum of the American Revolution. On the property, that 153 acres, we have a range of landscape resources, and you can see them on an image, modern image, which shows the heavily forested nature of the space now as the farm, and in 1939, what the farm looked like. And where the Prince Perkins homestead or archaeological site is located. Up in the far right, left corner is the Perkins-Dennis cemetery area where the family members, many of the family members are buried. And down closer to the road and closer to the stream are the Dennis Farm house and farm complex. And throughout all of that forested area are the stone wall fragments and sections that marked fields and property lines. It's very much reminiscent of a New England landscape. In that the stone wall segments and things are still there under the tree canopy. I called it the Perkins-Dennis Farm or the Dennis Farm, partly because of the kind of ownership that we see here, and that's, I mentioned Prince Perkins arrived in the area after the American Revolution. He is a Revolutionary War veteran. He is the son-in-law to another Revolutionary War veteran who settled nearby, and that was Bristol Bud Sampson. Both are from Connecticut. Their granddaughter, Angeline Perkins, marries Henry W. Dennis. Henry was born in Vermont, and then his father, in turn, had been born in Massachusetts and had actually served in the War of 1812. So there are a number of American war veterans who are associated with the site who are African Americans. Archaeological work has been done here a couple different times, principally in 2008 and 2009 when Binghamton, SUNY Binghamton conducted their field school on the site. At the Prince Perkins site, you see them working here, or lounging, I think is more likely in some cases. They were excavating 18 units at that site. Initially, in the 2 years that they worked there, they ended up doing more like 30 units in that space. Recovered a limited number of artifacts, but investigated the cellar hole that you see outlined in the map with the dark line. But there also is a spring house and spring head there, and the remnant walls that comprise that space. And it also included their conclusions based on the ceramics and other artifacts that recovered is that they were looking at a site that dated to approximately 1800 to 1850. Now, I apologize that my red-bone coonhound has decided to bark in the background. Today, if you go and visit the Prince Perkins homestead, it's an archaeological site waiting to be investigated. It's a remarkable space that has is intact. It's not been plowed or disked or farmed in any way. It's been in a wooded space for a very, very long time. So it's a site that's still intact and waiting for further investigation. And you see it illustrated here with a kind of a new marker that's been placed and a fence just placed to protect the cellar hole and to keep that space from people dropping into it. It's becoming the Prince Perkins site and the Dennis Farm itself are becoming more of a destination point in northeastern Pennsylvania, and people are coming to visit. Up the hill from the Perkins site is the Perkins-Dennis family cemetery. This is the only known African American cemetery in Susquehanna County. It's a 4,800 square foot space enclosed by a stone wall. Right now, there are known to be 40 to 50 interments. Has in American Revolutionary War veterans and USC veteran interments here. Surnames that we know identified are Perkins, Dennis, Sampson, Underwood, and Jackson. We're working right now with the Westchester University to see if we can't have a ground penetrating radar survey done within the cemetery and the exterior to see if we can't pin down exactly how many burials may actually be located in this space. There is no intention to do anything other than maintain the burial space, not to excavate in this particular situation. And we want to thank the Brooklyn Historical Society for having worked for many, many years to maintain and preserve this space, particularly in the period about 1980s and 1990s. Today, if you visit the site, a new stone has been placed outside of the burial ground to commemorate the names of the people that we know are buried in that burial ground. You see an image of that on the lower right. This is the Perkins-Dennis Family Cemetery Memorial Stone. And as I mentioned, we have the symposium here every year. This was the event that was held in 2014 to place that stone. Talk a little bit about the Dennis house. You see an image here of the house in its heyday. We know it was a New England construction. It's a timber frame construction building, which is not unusual in the Allegheny Plateau, but if you move through other sections of Pennsylvania, you find that this is not the kind of construction technique that you would be expecting. But it had originally a center pile chimney. We know it was built in the second quarter of the 19th century, and we know that the family remodeled the house in the 1990s. In the early 2000s, 2011, 2013, we unfortunately lost the roof on that house. And so you see a pole barn that's been placed over the building until we're able to do the renovation restoration to restore the building to its look of the circa 1940 period, which is when we have the best imagery and the best material for it. By this point, the family was actually using the house, the Dennis family was using the house as a summer home, a summer vacation home. Archaeology was done here also in the 2008 and 2009 period, which over 11,000 artifacts were recovered. And you can see what the area looked like in the left-hand side when that work was originally done. The grounds do not look like that now. They're much more opened up and cleaned up. But the excavations produced a remarkable set of material that indicates an occupation, obviously, from the mid-19th century into the 20th century. Most recently, we've done some archaeological work in anticipation of that renovation work and excavated a unit just next to the side of the house to try to gain more material information about how that cellar was put together and what kind of information we might be able to get. You see in the upper slide there, for example, the recovery of an apple corer that we found on the site. We know that they actually there was an orchard on the property immediately behind the house. Just a range of some of the artifacts that have been recovered in addition to the large amount of historic ceramics that were found. A lot of small find items were recovered that help us understand daily life and history on the property. The small item in the lower right-hand corner is a little filigree jewelry fragment of some kind. In the upper left corner is an interesting 1910 Lincoln head penny, which clearly has had some stippling done with Lincoln actually making a proclamation, apparently, in the image itself. The work that was done here was under the direction of John Roby. He received his PhD from SUNY Binghamton and actually has published a little bit about the work that he did here. I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. 2013, we started the stabilization work on the house, and the house itself is an artifact and can be seen as providing some really exciting information. The lower right-hand photograph you see is a wallpaper taken from inside the house where we had, in one situation, 6 or 7 layers of wallpaper in the same spot. Artifacts also were recovered when we did that house stabilization, and so you begin to see also some of the material remains that are just associated with the building itself and the material that was in the house itself. All of which await further investigation in ways that we can do. We have a lot of ongoing initiatives with the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust, and this just gives you a range of what some of those are. There's an annual symposium that I've mentioned, but there's also an annual forum on racial understanding that the family has developed and created, because this is very much the public outreach side of what the trust wants to be involved with. We have tourism on site through organized tours, spring through fall. We have a broad and kind of diverse high school and university programming that we've developed, also as part of the education component. scholarship programs, an essay contest, a lot of public appearances, online newsletter, and most recently, a YouTube space has just been created this year. We have a lot of, as I said, education partnerships with colleges, universities, and high schools. We're always looking for doing more with that. So if there are other universities or organizations that want to be partners or involved in the site, they simply need to let us know and contact us. The most significant of that group is Keystone College, because they provide the docents that take tours of the site. Keystone is just down the road in Factoryville. Also, as I mentioned, the archaeology was done by the State University of New York at Binghamton, but we've had other programs at the site as well. The Keystone College Docent Program is a really very exciting and active program. It's led by the man in the standing next to me there on in the center, Lucas Taylor. And so if you're interested in the program, you contact Lucas through Keystone and you can get a guided tour of the property. University of Delaware did a historic structures report of the building in the process of when we were beginning to develop the renovation restoration plans. They were able to investigate the house and provide us with a lot of great information, not only about the house itself, but about other timber frame structures still standing in the northeastern section of Pennsylvania, Susquehanna County, which now leads us into that realm of architectural history and investigation that others can begin to think about their region and the history and development of that region. We've also had other scholarly studies done, such as this one, which you might think was not a particularly exciting thing to look at, but which actually done by Winterthur University of Delaware Program in Art Conservation, where Emily Farrick looked at the dining room wallpapers. And so those layers of wallpaper that I mentioned, she was actually able to peel those apart and begin to think about how the house was used and decorated, and what did that mean for the kind of importance of, or what did people place on the importance of display of this room and this area. It indicated that the wallpaper was fairly early in its placement in the house, suggesting that the Dennises in the 1850s felt that they wanted this house to look as top-notch as possible. We have an ongoing relationship with the Mountain View School District. We initiated that in 2017, and that's to be involved both in their high school and middle school programs, but also with helping understand African American history, archaeology, family history, landscape, geography, geology, science, and any ways that this site can be linked into the stories that they are telling in those schools. That included an Earth Day program in 2018, where Mountain View students went out and labeled the trees and helped to identify significant trees and identify the invasives that we know that are there. It also helped in a year later with a actual maple sugaring program that was started on site, where the trees were being tapped for maple sugar again. Well, as I mentioned, there is an ongoing forum, a racial forum that's named after Lanae Moore, the daughter of, Lonnie Moore, who she passed away tragically. She was an undergraduate student at Delaware State University and was killed in a car accident. We used this as a way to begin to discuss those difficult conversations about race, and in a section of Pennsylvania where, as I mentioned, does not have a large or vocal African American population, this can be a very, very interesting conversation and an important conversation for the community to have. Recently, we've had interpretive markers placed on the site so that you're able to go and tour the property, not only with the docents, but also get a sense of the history of the area, so that there are groups of markers that can help you work your way up from the lower tier up to the upper tier of the farm and up to where the cemetery is. There's been discussion that we may actually be a site on the Underground Railroad. If you look at Cheryl LaRoche's work, and she may talk about this later as part of her keynote, she identifies 5 key elements that you might need on a property to have in order to qualify or be a site that might have been identified on the railroad. And that included support of church congregations, key individuals that are documented on the Underground Railroad, a settlement of Black community of any size, cemeteries, which with USCT graves or others, and a landscape conducive to secretive travel. We don't know for sure if the site was located on the railroad. I would say that having a first edition of William Still's Underground Railroad in your library may be an indication that this wasn't just a passing interest on the family of Henry W. Dennis, but actually something that he may have been involved with. We also know that other historians have identified Susquehanna County as probably the most active abolitionist area in the Endless Mountains region. And we know that south of us was the village of Waverly and north of us, the village of Montrose, both of which were active anti-slavery locations. So it's conceivable that the Dennis Farm may have factored into this in some particular way. A number of publications have come out where you can read about the farm. In particular, the volume on the right-hand side, John Roby actually wrote about the archaeology and some of the work that he did here. And he talks about the maple sugaring issue and the maple sugaring that he identified on the site. Also, the discussion of Bristol Bud Sampson. We have pension records for Bristol Bud, who clearly identify him as a American Revolutionary War veteran. The farm has figured at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture prior to the opening of the facility. There was a display at the Museum of American History that included a genealogy chart of the family of the Perkins-Dennis family. And a number of the items that have been donated to the Smithsonian that will be or are on display at the new museum. And Lonnie Bunch has visited the site before, the director of the Smithsonian or museum, and the fact that he says the farm consists of an extensive property documented by historical sources and remains after more than 2 centuries in the hands of the original African-American family make it truly an exceptional site. Most recently, the site was chosen to host the first America 250 PA semi-quincentennial bell. We just announced this in October, so this is very much what we're doing at the farm is very much an ongoing program, and this is the most recent statement that we have. The Pennsylvania Commission chose the site. It'll be one of several bronze commemorative bells that are placed to recognize the 250th anniversary of the United States. And the bell will probably be placed on the farm by 2023, which will be a fairly exciting and really important event. You can learn more about the farm through the Facebook page, the web page that you see identified here, and also a YouTube channel. And the YouTube channel, certainly there's a lot more information that can be presented there. You can see a number of presentations that have been now uploaded that people can view and get a better sense of what's going on at the farm. I urge you all, if you're interested, to come and tour the site. If you want to tour the farm, you give the Keystone College a call. There is an address now. For a long time, we didn't have an address on Creek Road at Kingsley, but we now have a real functioning address so that you can find the site. You could Google it and identify its location, but certainly if you're interested in visiting the site, you want to give Keystone a call. Its tours are by appointment at this point. And lastly, I'll leave you with my email address. I'm certainly happy to talk with any of you if you're interested. And I'll leave you also with the statement that Miss Denise Dennis makes every time in every conversation we have, and that's onward and upward. The farm has a lot of potentials and is really looking forward to widening its community of interest, widening the number of things that can be done. And every year we do this, we get a ever growing group of people who have a care and an interest. I will point out that we are in the process right now. I mentioned that we've received grants from a number of organizations. The National Endowment for the Humanities, we are working right now on a challenge grant to raise money to help with the renovation of the house. And that is a $400,000 challenge grant that the trust has received. And with that, I think I will pass it back over, and I'll stop my share and pass it back over.
Okay, Wade, that really was an excellent presentation, but that resource is just spectacular. Just no doubt about it. I remember the first time I heard your presentation several years ago, I thought, wow. And I think it's gotten better since that time.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. There's a lot, obviously, I left out. We have a lot of documentation about the site. There's a lot of newspaper clippings and things that I could have included here. There are storylines that can be investigated by any number of researchers. And as I say, if people are really interested in this, they can contact us. They can contact the family or the trust. We're very excited about all the kinds of ways that people can be involved in the work that we're doing.
Excellent. Janet, do we have time? I think we're time for a few questions. Do we have any questions?
We do. The first question is, how are the Perkins and Dennis's integrated into the socioeconomic life of the local and regional community?
I just saw that question, and I think that's from my old friend Al Panetti, and that's a good question, Al. The Perkins family and the Dennis family were both considered to be, and particularly the Perkins family was seen from the very beginning as one of the founding groups or families that moved into the region. I didn't go into this, but the region was initially land that was in dispute between Pennsylvania and Connecticut. And there's a thing referred to as the Yankee-Pennamite Wars that occur here, that before the American Revolution, both Pennsylvania and Connecticut claimed this land. And if you look at the line of Connecticut, it would, in theory, have extended all the way across the space, whereas Pennsylvania was thinking their line went north from that space. So the linkage to New England and the Perkinses and the Dennises coming out of New England is not unusual when you understand that, and also Gershom Prince having come into that area. So the Perkinses are seen from the very beginning as significant individuals. They are members of the community. The Dennises are the same, treated in the same fashion. In the ag censuses from 1850 to 1880, the Dennis house and the Dennis farm actually show up as the only African-American recorded house. Now, in order to even made it into the census at that point, you had to produce X amount of dollars worth of produce. Only the Dennis family at that time was able to do that. There are a number of statements. The family, the history of the family and the history of the property get mentioned in the 19th century antiquarian histories of the area. And there are statements made in there that talk about the importance of the family. Prince Perkins, for example, was seen as someone who, if you wanted to have an event or a party, you had to have him there, as he was a well-known fiddler, violin player, and was somebody that you wanted at any event that you did. So I don't know, I can go into more of that, but there may be other questions as well, and so I'll back off from that one. I hope that helps with what your question.
There is another question about research as to what was grown there on the farm. I recall in a previous presentation of yours discussion about the maple syrup and harvesting maple syrup there, which I'm happy to see that the local high school is active in that, and I'm hopefully learning about the heritage of that resource to the family.
Yeah, the farm was like, as I say, the 1850 to 1880 ag census. The farm was producing many of the same things that other farmers in the area were. They were growing grain crops. There was cattle on the property as well. By the late 19th century, they also are dairy farmers. And so you're seeing, particularly with a railroad station right there at Oakley Crossing, they were able to move milk and other dairy products by rail to the communities that were located close by. So dairy farming was an important component here as well.
I think that's it for questions right now.
I would add one more thing about the maple sugaring, which is very important from a anti-slavery society or anti-slavery thought process. And that is that there on the site archaeologically was recovered, and again in that ag census, the Dennises were producing maple sugar or product. And the intent was that a northern farm complex should be doing this rather than purchasing sugar produced, cane sugar produced by enslaved labor. And so this may have been, while it's not stated and we haven't got it in the documents, it may have been a way for the family to indicate that they were supportive of anti-slavery programs.